Okay, welcome to this luncheon meeting. We're very happy to continue with our focused issue of the American election. I guess you're all getting slowly warmed up in this field. We all imagine, according to the headlines, that this will be a crash test of democracy. And the new technological tools suggest it may get dirtier than ever. So it's difficult to judge. American public has remained something very awkward for us to judge. And we are always taken by surprise in a very positive way, that the public is much more sober and much more reliable and responsible for what we are generally calling checks and balances. So after all these recent news you have seen last night, I've seen on German television President Biden sort of on a pickup truck in Feathers, and you have heard former President Trump talking about the criminals of January 6th as hostages. So one can imagine what kind of playground this will be in the coming months. And I think we do need the expertise of someone who has been accompanying American reality for a long life and has gained lots of very close information about what America means. David Goldfield is not here for the first time. I still remember sort of how he calmed us down sort of when we were worrying in 2012, I think, about the re-election of Obama. And as you know from our invitation, he is a long-term supporter of the Democratic Party and had a brilliant, glamorous career at the university and was a very important supporter of the State Department in Washington. He has written numerous books. Some of them got close to Pulitzer Prize. And for us, I think he has a particular attraction aspect, and that's that he comes from North Carolina, one of the swing states. As you know, in the end, it's 6 or 7 states that decide on the presidency. So to get as close as David Goldfield in North Carolina is almost getting the feeling for the outcome of the whole presidential campaign. Let me just briefly, I just noticed that I've forgotten, you have received this piece of paper which in a way shows 2 aspects of the new program. One is concentrating on the German Supreme Court, which is surprisingly vulnerable, or has turned out to be vulnerable, So we will place two major speakers on this issue. The other thing is security. And those who have watched last night the program, a large program on NATO, and here we are back on the issue of Trump and possible American foreign policy, we will talk about the new security aspect for Germany and for Europe. So you please note this, Mölling and Eilsinger. It's both. It's the professional of the army and the professional in the political analysis. So I hope we can sort of update you on all these issues. But now we return to election 2024. And David Goldfield, Robert Lee Bailey, Professor of History of North Carolina, Charlottesville.
Thank you very much. Dankeschön. It's a pleasure to be back in Heidelberg, especially working with Joachim and his staff. And also I want to thank my colleagues at the Frankfurt Consulate and especially my colleague there. I was thinking the first thing that I would do this afternoon is to ask for political asylum in Germany. Because things are really deteriorating in my home country, and we have a very close election right now. But don't pay attention to the polls. If you don't get anything from what I say this afternoon, that is one thing that I want you to do. Right now, the polls are irrelevant. It's just too early. But as Yogi Berra once said, it's getting late very early. So maybe we should look at them from time to time. But what I'd like to do this afternoon, I would like to talk about the 2024 presidential election, place it in historical context, and also see how and why we are going to have our election in November, and maybe project who will win. So let us begin. Now, I may walk around a little bit. So, if you don't mind, I will walk around now. You see my state of North Carolina up there. This is the election of 1944. Now, why in the world am I showing you a map of the 1944 presidential election? What does that have to do with 2024? Well, what that has to do with 2024, and I want you to take a close look at this was the last time in American history, going all the way back to the American Revolution, it was the last time in American history that the South voted solidly Democratic. Now, I'm originally from Tennessee, Memphis, which is right up there. right on the border of the state of Mississippi. In my city of Memphis, there was only one political party when I was born. Just one, the Democratic Party. If you said you were a Republican, it was no longer safe for you to be within Memphis. The reason, of course, is that Abraham Lincoln was a Republican, and Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves, and Abraham Lincoln beat us during the American Civil War. So when you walked into that voting booth, if you even thought of pulling the lever for the Republican Party, you would suddenly hear Jeb Stuart's cavalry, Robert E. Lee's charge going forward. And you wouldn't do it. You would vote, of course, for the Democrat. And that's the way it was. When my parents registered to vote in Memphis, it wasn't a question they asked, well, what party? They registered as Democrats, because if you said you were Republican, forget about getting a job, especially in city institutions like public schools, for example. So that's how solidly South the Democratic Party was. And of course, take a look at the colors. Blue is Democrat, red is Republican. Now, what does that mean? Well, it means absolutely nothing, because in 1980, long after 1944, in 1980, the NBC television network was broadcasting the 1980 presidential election. And some official at NBC News said, you know, everybody in America now has colored TV. Why don't we color the maps and give Republicans red, Democrats blue? So that accounts for the shading: blue, Democrat, red, Republican, NBC News. Now, the turning point began with the Truman administration. As many of you probably know, Franklin D. Roosevelt died in office in April of 1945. Harry Truman was his vice president and, of course, became president. And one of the first things he did, well, the first thing he did was drop an atom bomb on Japan. But after that, the second thing he did was to introduce civil rights legislation into Congress. Now, Life magazine, which was a leading publication at the time, everybody read Life magazine, conducted a survey. And do you know how many Americans believed that civil rights was an important issue? 6%. 6%. Which is, politically, that's nothing, but Truman felt so strongly about it, which is odd because Truman came from Missouri, a part of Missouri that was very much part of the Confederacy. His grandfather fought for the Confederate States of America. So he grew up in this segregated Confederate town, but he also believed that in America, every American, regardless of color, should have the ability to have equal rights as guaranteed by the U.S. Constitution. Now, Truman was an interesting fellow because he was a county commissioner which is a low-level political office. But he was very close friends with this guy by the name of Pendergast in Kansas City, and that was a Democratic Party machine, as was the case in other cities in the country. And Pendergast said, "Harry, why don't you run for the U.S. Senate?" He says, "I'm just a county commissioner." Pendergast said, "We'll finance your campaign. We need a Democrat representing Missouri in the U.S. Senate." Well, he won. The only time in American history that a county commissioner has gone from the county to the U.S. Senate. And most of the senators didn't want anything to do with him because Tom Pendergraft was a crook, as many bosses were in those days. But gradually, they appreciated, one, his work ethic, and two, his ideas for keeping and maintaining democracy, particularly in a world in the mid and late 1930s, where those elements were in danger. So one of the first things he did, as I said, was to attack racial prejudice, attack racial segregation. And he called together a group of people, and you see them here, to study how to make racial equality American, how to ensure that Black Americans are equal with whites. And what the report said, it's a wonderful report. It's not a long report. You can look it up on the internet. It's called "To Secure These Rights." Is they detailed how Black Americans can become equal citizens with white Americans in the America of the late 1940s. Now, after he signed this, and this is the signing ceremony in 1947, of course, after he signed it, 1948 presidential election, everybody said, "Truman, you're dead. You're finished." I mean, remember that map, 1944 in the South? You think white Southerners are going to vote for you? Not only did you sign this, but you're a traitor. You're a traitor to your race. You're a traitor to your region. You'll just never win. 1948 presidential election. Truman won, despite the fact that several Southern states seceded from the Democratic Party, and they established their own party, the Dixiecrats, not the Democrats, the Dixiecrats. And Strom Thurmond of South Carolina was their presidential candidate. Fielding Wright of Mississippi was the vice presidential candidate, and they won 4 states. Now, of course, the Dixiecrats knew that there was no way America was going to elect anybody from the Dixiecrat Party, but what they hoped for was that no candidate would receive 270 electoral votes, which you need, of course, to become president. And therefore, according to our Constitution, the election is thrown into the House of Representatives. And guess who controlled the House of Representatives? Southerners. And they controlled the U.S. Senate as well. So deals could be made. And that had happened before in American history. This is not something that just pulled out of thin air. It happened in 1876 when Samuel J. Tilden, the Democratic candidate, had more votes than Rutherford B. Hayes, the Republican candidate. I know this story well because I went to Samuel J. Tilden High School. And we were losers in football as well. Okay. But the defection of these states did not throw the election to the Republican candidate, the New York governor, Thomas E. Dewey. But it made the election very close. What happened was in other southern states, they said, look, don't throw away your vote. These guys are not going to win. Vote for the Democrat because you don't want the Republicans in power in Washington. That's not good for the South. Now, in the early 1960s, Senator Barry Goldwater, the grandson of Jewish immigrants, ran for president on the Republican Party ticket. He was very conservative, considerably more conservative than his Republican predecessor, Dwight D. Eisenhower. Now, Dwight D. Eisenhower, when he left the presidency in 1960, every 7 years or so, I get a call from the Congressional Record asking me to rank the presidents, not only me, but other political scientists and historians as well. And through the years, Eisenhower started off as number 20. And, of course, we've had 45, 46 presidents. Now he's at number 5. And he's at number 5 because he did a lot of things behind the scenes that were not publicized. Just to give you a few examples, he desegregated the armed forces, the bases, the military bases in the South. Truman allegedly had the power to do that, but he begged off. Eisenhower, as a former general, instituted it. His wife, Mamie Eisenhower, about 3 weeks after Dwight Eisenhower took office in 1953, Mamie Eisenhower was told that, well, you know, the Easter season is coming, and we have an annual Easter egg roll on the White House lawn for the school children of Washington, D.C. And the First Lady organizes it and invites the children and the teachers, principals, so on. And she said, okay, give me the list. And they gave her a list of 4 elementary schools in Washington, D.C. And she said, you know, Washington, D.C. is a big city. They have 4 elementary schools. Well, she found out that they were only the white elementary schools because Washington, D.C. was a segregated city, just as my city, Memphis, was a segregated city. So she said, oh, no, this is not going to work. I want all the school children invited. Well, she did it. And that set the tone of the Eisenhower administration. And for the first time since the end of Reconstruction in 1877, the U.S. Congress in 1957 passed the Civil Rights Law. So the Eisenhower administration was really very important in restoring to the public debate what Harry Truman tried to do in his administration. Now, of course, Lyndon Johnson won in 1964 over Barry Goldwater, or won significantly. Goldwater was just too conservative for the American electorate. And what you see here is Johnson addressing the U.S. Congress. And he's addressing the U.S. Congress. Notice I skipped John F. Kennedy, who was between Eisenhower. I skipped John F. Kennedy because he did zero in civil rights. Eisenhower did a great deal, and Johnson did even more. And what he's saying in this speech, telling Americans that we have to have civil rights for all black citizens because your rights as white people depend on that as well. Because if we bar people because of their color, the next step is to bar people because of their religion. The next step is to bar people for where they live. The next step is to bar people who are poor. So we need to do this for all Americans. And we did. The 1964 Civil Rights Act, which ended racial discrimination in the United States in the public sector, and particularly the 1965 Voting Rights Act. In my home state of Tennessee, well, blacks could vote in Memphis as long as they voted for the Democratic Party. But in my home state of Tennessee, only about 15% of black voters could vote. Not that they didn't want to vote, is that it was very, very difficult to vote. Because if you were black, you had to pass a literacy test. And the literacy test consisted, they put forward the U.S. Constitution, in some cases the state constitution of Tennessee or Mississippi or Alabama, and they asked you to interpret a particular section. And you would never get it right. Never, ever get it right. So, in 1964, look at these states down here, right? That looks familiar, right? 1948. These are the states who voted for Goldwater. Of course, Arizona is where Goldwater was from. But these deep South states, South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana. I used to live in Alabama. Got my first teaching job there. One wonderful state. Politics, something else. But it's almost like the 1944 map. And you can see exactly what is happening here. It's not that Barry Goldwater was a beloved Republican, because folks down there never voted Republican. But as one voter in Mississippi said, Barry Goldwater could have come out in favor of collectivizing the farms in Mississippi, and we'd still vote for him because he voted against the 1964 Civil Rights Act. That was the litmus test. That was the key. Something else was happening in America in the 1960s besides the civil rights movement. We were moving away from an industrial economy into a knowledge economy, into an economy that emphasized the importance of college education, into an economy that was more directed toward commerce than to industry, into a more urban nation. And this left people out of work. This also particularly with respect to civil rights, meant that white people were not the only superior Americans. They now had competition because the law required it. And so we had a governor, George Wallace of Alabama, running for president in 1968. And in order to run for president, of course, you have to go through what we call primaries. So he went to the Democratic primary, and everybody said, well, when he gets up to the Wisconsin primary or the Indiana primary up north, he's going to be dead in the water. Well, guess what? He got 43% of the vote in Wisconsin, an overwhelmingly white state. And he realized, and Americans realized for the first time, that this issue of race, this issue of being on the wrong side of the economy as well, was not something that was localized in the American South. It was now becoming a national phenomenon. In 1980, the Republican Party nominated Ronald Reagan as its candidate. Now, take a good look as to where each candidate this year, Trump and Biden, where they begin their campaigns. I mean, obviously you have to begin your campaign somewhere, but it has particular resonance. And the resonance is that this is what I stand for as a presidential candidate, and this is what I will stand for as president. So Ronald Reagan opened his 1980 presidential campaign in Neshoba County, Mississippi, specifically the town of Philadelphia, Mississippi. Well, so what? He's looking for Southern votes. Wait a second. What happened in Philadelphia, Mississippi? In 1964, 3 civil rights workers were murdered in Philadelphia, Mississippi. 1 black, 2 white college students from the North. They had come to help black citizens in Philadelphia, Mississippi, register to vote. And Ronald Reagan opened his 1980 presidential campaign in Philadelphia, Mississippi, and that sent a message. Now, that was one of the most important elections in American history because it began the growing separation of the political parties ideologically. As you could see here, Republicans have moved further to the right than the Democrats to the left. Republicans red, Democrats blue. And you'll see that through 2022. That was midterm elections. Obviously, we don't have anything for 2024 yet. But you can see in the Senate and the House, this is from 1971 to 2022, the Republican Party has moved more to the right than the Democrats have moved to the left. Now, let's look at 2024. We have two political parties, major political parties, and 2 coalitions. Democrats tend to be younger. Young people tend to vote for the Democratic Party, tend to be female. In the 2020 presidential election, 54% of women voted for Joe Biden. 47% of men. Unmarried, multiracial, urban, small city, coastal states. The cities, like my city, overwhelmingly Democratic. Secular, in other words, they don't go to church, temple, or other religious institutions. Infrequent church goers, Jews and Muslims. When I give a talk like this in a place like West Bank in the Middle East, or Palestinian West Bank, the people there go, Jews and Muslims voting the same way. But that's true in America, but it may not be true this year, but it has been true. If you told me the Muslim vote in a given presidential year saying that 71% for Democrats, I would tell you that the Jewish vote would be about 71% for Democrats. If you want an insight into elections, you just track the Muslim and Jewish vote because they're almost exactly the same. The GOP Grand Old Party was another name for Republicans. They tend to be older, men, much more than women. If President Biden gets 42% of the male vote, a white male vote, he'll win the election this year. But 42% obviously is not a lot. Married, mostly white, rural, ex-urban, heartland states, regular churchgoers, white Protestants, evangelicals, and Catholics. Catholics are interesting here because there's a split. Hispanic Catholics tend to vote for the Democrats. White Catholics tend to vote for Republicans. So it's 50-50. If somebody tells me on Election Day that it looks like 50% of Catholics are split 50-50, that probably means the Democrat will be elected. But if it's less than that, it's the Republican. If it's more than that, it's again the Democrat. So that's a change. But religion does matter in elections. Now, you can see here 270 to win. It doesn't mean 270 votes. It means 270 electoral votes. Individual votes are meaningless. So what if Joe Biden wins California by 12 million votes? It's a nice statistic, but nobody remembers the number of votes cast. When I go, I have never, ever voted for a president of the United States. And none of my fellow Americans have ever voted for a president of the United States. Instead, we vote for electors. And each state, depending upon their population, and North Carolina, my state, has 15. The electoral votes are determined by the number of is determined by population, and depending on your population, you get 13 members of Congress plus 2 senators. So 13 plus 2 is 15. More populous states like California, they have 55 electoral votes, which is a lot. They're a little less now because this was a map from the 2020 presidential election, and we've had a new census. And California has lost 2 from 55. It's all based on population. And what you can see here from this map is that let's say all of us here this afternoon have come to Heidelberg from Mars. And I told you red is Republican, blue is Democrat. And you look at this map and you say, well, there's sure a lot of red on there. Well, yeah, but a Democrat, Joe Biden, was elected. The reason, of course, is that these numbers are based, as I said, on population. And you need 270 to win. The total number of electoral votes is 438. And that means that it's possible. I'm sorry, 538. 538. It's okay. I'm still on North Carolina time. 538, which means that it is possible to have a tie, right? 269 and 269 or 538, right? What happens then if there's a tie? Well, the election goes into the House of Representatives. And in the House of Representatives, it's not one person, one vote. Each state has a vote. So that will determine the presidential election, not the voters. As I said, I've never voted for president. I vote for electors. And if somebody here this afternoon asked me, well, do you know your electors? I have no idea who they are. Their names are not on the ballot. I have no idea. So I voted for people I don't know. And in most states, of course, they're pledged to a particular candidate. But if they decide later on, hey, I really don't like this guy, I'm going to vote for the other guy. Or I'm going to vote for somebody else. You can do that. You can do that. So it's really a very strange system. But then, okay, does that mean that the vice president has to do that? Well, the vice president goes through a different process. The vice president goes to the Senate. And there in the Senate, instead of having each state with a vote, each senator has a vote. This is all in our Constitution. I mean, is that a screwy system? It's such a screwy system that twice in this century, in 2000 and in 2016, the person who got the most votes in a presidential election was not elected. So it can happen again. Usually when you live in a democratic society, as we all do, the person with the most votes wins. Very simple. Not that way in the U.S. with president. And we can talk more about why that is. Now, in 2001, Hillary Clinton, who was then a senator from New York, after the 2000 presidential election, where Albert Gore, the Democratic candidate, got more electoral votes, got more popular votes than George W. Bush in the 2000 election, said, hey, we got to take a look at this electoral college stuff. So let's form a study committee, not to change anything, but to study it. It went down in flames in the U.S. Senate. Very few senators. To get a bipartisan vote on anything is difficult. On this, they got a bipartisan vote. No, we don't want it. Because political parties are accustomed to conducting presidential campaigns in just a few states. And here is what I mean. this election in 2024 really only matters in 7 or 8 states. Because I can tell you already that Joe Biden's going to win California. I can tell you that Donald Trump is going to win Mississippi. But what I can't tell you is, well, who's going to win North Carolina, my state? Who's going to win Georgia? Who's going to win Arizona and Nevada and Pennsylvania and Michigan and Wisconsin? Those are the so-called battleground states. That's where the presidential candidate will win or lose. So, for example, in the 2012 presidential race between Barack Obama and George Romney, Barack Obama came to North Carolina 12 times, the same exact number of times that Hillary Clinton came in 2016, and that Joe Biden didn't come in 2020 because it was the pandemic year. But still, we're going to have the two candidates in North Carolina a long, long time, especially since we already know who they are. So this is where and you see some states in sort of light red or blue. Texas is going to be for Trump. Iowa, Ohio, these used to be borderline states, but not anymore. They're really leaning Republican. Colorado and Virginia used to be these borderline battleground states. Not anymore. They're Democratic. So we only have a few of them where we don't know. And that is where the presidential election is going to be decided. Let me give you an example from the previous presidential election, 2020. This is Virginia, which Joe Biden won. Then Democrat blue, Republican red. Well, you look at this map of Virginia, and man, there's a lot of red, right? Yeah, but if you look, the suburbs of Washington, D.C., the state capital of Richmond, and the major cities of Norfolk and Virginia Beach, basically it's the urban areas. Again, urban, rural, urban, small town. That's the division in America. Even more so, if you take a look at Michigan. Michigan, again, a battleground state. This is the 2020, well, you can see a 2020 presidential map of Michigan. Now, you look at Michigan, red, Republican, blue, Democrat. Oh, a Republican won easily. It was just a blowout. No. Biden won Michigan. Why did he win Michigan? He won Detroit. He won Flint. He won East Lansing. The rest of Michigan voted for Trump. But the cities, with their concentrations of population. So you can see that the dividing line in America, not only in these battleground states, but in almost all states, urban, rural. And these are the two candidates. I can tell you that this is probably the most accurate thing I will show you today. About a quarter of Americans have an unfavorable view of both Biden and Trump, and you can see that. This is not something that Americans are particularly looking forward to, especially since we have 6-7 months to go in the campaign. Now, what are the issues? Well, there are 3 major issues. In every presidential campaign, except for 1944 when foreign affairs, obviously we were in the midst of World War II. But there are always 3 major issues. 1, the economy. 2, the economy. 3, the economy. And you can see that here. Top priority this year, in 2024, strengthening the economy, defending against terrorism, reducing influence of money in politics, reducing health care costs, improving education, making Social Security financially sound. A lot of those are economic issues. I mean, if you lump the economic issues together, they're really significant. Where is Ukraine and the Middle East? Nowhere. Americans really are not that interested in foreign policy, especially nowadays. They're much more interested in what's happening at home. I'm happy if my students can identify Germany on a map, which many can't, but by the way. Oh, it's somewhere there, west of Russia, So these are the issues, but it's really the economy. But there's something else, and this chart doesn't measure that. There's something else. Many people are just resentful. They're resentful that their influence in American life has gone down. They're resentful that other newer groups, like black people, like brown people in particular, have become more important, are participating more in American life. They are not happy that the economy has changed to the point where if you have a high school education, that's not enough. That's not enough. And Donald Trump brought out these resentments in 2016, and he's doing it again. We call it revenge voting. And it doesn't appear on this chart, but it is important to point out. So immigration, of course, is as I mentioned, is another important issue. And you can see its importance rising from 2021 to, this year, 2024. But it's mainly rising among Republicans because Republicans have become the party of the working class. And many in the working class fear that immigrants are challenging their jobs, are competing with them for the economy, and are using public resources that they pay taxes to for the economy. Now, another thing to keep in mind is religion plays a role in our elections. I mentioned Jews and Muslims being solidly Democratic. Jewish voters have been voting for the Democratic Party since 1832. That's a long, long time. Andrew Jackson is the candidate, by the way. You see, as you can see here, 2/3 of white evangelicals see Trump favorably. That's his core. That's his core constituency, white evangelical Protestants. That is his core constituency. Now you may say, what? A guy who's been divorced, who talks strange language, who manipulates women, how can that be a candidate of evangelical Protestants? Well, we all believe in redemption, don't we? We'll see. And if you look down the chart, you will see that as you get further down the chart, Trump becomes less attractive until, if you're an atheist, agnostic, black Protestant, Jewish, nothing in particular. So religion does play a role. I know, living in Memphis, I know people walked into the voting booth and thought about the Civil War. And some evangelical Protestants do the same thing. Well, I don't really like Trump, but he's really one of us. And of course, there is the issue of redemption. So that plays a role. And I will tell you that in evangelical churches, there are political rallies in the weeks before the presidential election. One other point I would like to make, and that is the abortion issue, which really surprised a lot of people in the 2022 midterm elections, and had a great role in turning over what is usually typical for an off-year or midterm election. That is, midterm elections, the party that holds the White House loses a lot in the Congress. And that was not true in 2022. And one of the major reasons why it was not true is the issue of abortion. And people said, well, okay, in 2022, but people will forget, because Americans have a short memory. People will forget. They'll forget by 2024. It's not happening. So let's look at the numbers right now. The House has 218 Republicans, 213 Democrats, and 4 vacant, for a total of 435. So you need 218 for a majority. So it's very close in the House of Representatives. And my prediction is that it's probably going to go to the Democrats. The Senate is a different story. Today, 49 Republicans, 48 Democrats. However, there are 3 independents, and almost always those 3 independents vote with the Democrats. So it's really 51 to 49. Again, very, very close, but controlled by the Democrats. But here's the statistic you need to focus on. Up for re-election, there are 33 senators. Every 2 years, about 1/3 of the U.S. Senate, because the senators serve 6 years. So every 2 years, about 1/3 of the U.S. Senate is up for election or re-election. And what you see here, 20 Democrats, 10 Republicans, and 3 independents. In other words, the Democrats have a lot more exposure than the Republicans do. And particularly in states that went for Trump in 2020. So it would not be surprising if the Republicans won the U.S. Senate and the Democrats won the U.S. House. So again, we would have a divided government. So let me tell you some good news. Our Congress is starting to look more and more like the rest of America. Racial and ethnic diversity is growing in the Congress. Women make up more than a quarter of this Congress U.S. membership. Younger generations make up a growing share of Congress in the House and in the Senate, the 118th, which is the 2023-2024 year. So this is very current. So where are we? Well, we're in Heidelberg in April of 2024. And although it's too early to give a final vote on this, it's all going to come to those battleground states, and particularly the turnout. And there are several things that might affect that turnout. Attempts of states, particularly in the South, but other places as well, to make registration more difficult, to make voting more difficult, because often that hurts the people of color most, who don't have the transportation to get to the polling place. Like in my state of North Carolina, what the state did was cut the number of Sundays you can vote. We have early voting, as many states do, before the actual general election day. Well, on Sundays, what happens is that buses pull up in front of black churches and drive their parishioners to the polling place. But obviously, if the polling place is closed, you can't do that. And Election Day in America is on a Tuesday. It is not a holiday anywhere. It's just a regular work day. So if you work 9 to 5, when do you vote? You can't. So that, I think, will have an impact on turnout, except when people say, hey, they're making it difficult for me to vote. Well, I'm going to show them. I don't care how long I have to wait. I don't care how difficult it is. I have to take a taxi. I'm going to go out and vote. Well, we'll see what happens. The problem is, of course, that Joe Biden doesn't generate that type of excitement. So some people, maybe even many people, will be going to the polls not because they're really, hey, Joe Biden, I'm going to vote for him. He's great. No, they're just afraid of Donald Trump. And that will be a motivation as well. And of course, for Republicans, the opposite is true. So we will see what happens. But I hope to be back here in the fall to give you an update. And as I said, maybe even to renew my application for asylum. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That's what you get if you invite a historian. You get the deeper understanding of what's going on. I guess some of you might be hungry, and your path to the food, but while some of us eat, we can already take some questions.
Absolutely.
So please, you are Oh, yeah. Yeah.
While you didn't mention yet, very many thanks for your excellent words about the. Actually, I got much more understanding about the system of the election. One thing which is I didn't get out of your words, it was to which extent the independent candidate like Kennedy might be threatening the votes for Biden, for instance, that he may take off votes from Biden.
Good question. The question was Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s candidacy. To what extent is that going to impact the votes for Biden? Well, the most recent thing I saw was last Friday, which is not long ago, that Kennedy will take votes away from both Trump and Biden. So it'll be sort of a wash. But you bring up an important point, and that is there may be other candidates besides Biden and Trump and Kennedy. And what impact might they have? Like Cornel West, for example. To what extent would he affect the black vote? So that remains to be seen. I didn't say anything about it because it is just sheer speculation at this point. But as far as Kennedy is concerned, it's really a wash.
Yeah, we have discussed quite vividly in Germany lately, since the Gaza problem has started, that it might affect the election, the upcoming election, in respect to the Muslims, who might have normally a tendency towards Biden, but are pro-Palestinian, and that this might cause them to vote for Trump instead. You did mention that problem. I want you to.
Yeah, that's a great question. The Muslim vote, in particular, as I mentioned, Muslims generally have voted Democratic. This as far back as 1890, and they're not going to vote for Trump. That's pretty certain. What they will do is not vote for president. In other words, and the problem with that is that Muslims are concentrated in a few battleground states, particularly Michigan. The largest Muslim population in America is in Michigan. And Michigan is a battleground state. And to give you an example, in 2020, Joe Biden got 69% of the Muslim vote in Michigan. He got 71% of the Jewish vote. As I said, the Jewish vote and the Muslim vote pretty much the same way. Now, let's talk a little bit about the Jewish vote. Now, the Jewish community in America is split. A majority in the last poll, 58%, it's a majority, not a great majority, but a majority nonetheless, believe that Netanyahu should go. And there should be some effort at a ceasefire. So Biden's move in that direction will help secure the Jewish vote. But you also have Jewish voters who want to see the Israelis, quote, finish the job. So there may be a split there. And the split is being aggravated by Republicans because they're saying, yeah, let Israel finish the job. So that might siphon off some of the Democratic votes. And like Muslims, Jewish voters are concentrated in certain areas, like Michigan, for example, like Florida, which used to be a borderline state, but is now trending Republican. Also, Jewish voters have the highest percentage of participation. That's key, because if you don't participate in an election, I can throw statistics at you all day. It won't mean anything because you don't vote. So if Jewish voters follow Muslim voters and just not vote for president, that could be a problem for Biden. But again, it's early.
Thank you for being with us, Mr. Goldfield. I just want to mention two things. First thing, most of Republicans don't vote for Trump. They're just loyal to their party. This is something also important. Like the Democrats are very enthusiastic about Biden. And the second thing is, we also in Germany cannot vote directly our chancellor. We are also voting for a party and elected representative.
Right. I think that's a really good point. The last point you made about the difference between U.S. and German elections, which is very true. The thing is, in the U.S., every election, except for the president, the person who has the most votes wins. So that's really the anomaly. Yeah.
Okay.
I have two questions. First, I don't understand why Protestants and evangelists are voting for Trump. Some days ago, he said the Bible is a very nice book, and he was asked, what is your best or your beloved text? And he has no answer. First. Second, how often came Trump in 2020 to North Carolina?
Trump came, let me remember this because he was also in Virginia quite often too. Trump came 11 times in North Carolina. So, and he won North Carolina. So that was important. And what was your first question again? Oh yeah, sure. The Bible. Well, I made a comment earlier about Barry Goldwater and about this voter in Mississippi said, well, I don't care if Barry Goldwater votes for the collectivization of farms in Mississippi. He voted against the Civil Rights Act. That's all that mattered to white voters in Mississippi, and they voted for Goldwater. And the same thing with Trump. If you're an evangelical Protestant, you believe in redemption. You also believe that we're all sinners, and we sin from time to time. So from a theological perspective, that's tolerated. But there is no question but that Donald Trump appeals to Christian nationalism, which is a growing movement in America. And he does it by using the Bible. He does it by claiming, well, religious Christians are victims. Again, this victim ideology that we're being persecuted. I mean, we just finished with Easter. We're being persecuted. And if you're evangelical Protestants, particularly Baptists, they're not doing that well. Many of them are, in fact, working class. So Biden resonates to them from a number of points of view. But certainly his dog whistles, his reach out to evangelical Protestants are important. Let me give you a personal example, if you'll permit me. As the introduction indicated, I've done programs for the U.S. State Department, and I've been to Israel a number of times, and I can tell you that among some Israelis, Trump really resonates. Now, the Israelis are not evangelical Protestants, as we all know, but this idea that religion can form your political opinion is very important in the U.S., particularly among evangelical Protestants, and particularly in the South. Just to give you one statistic, in 2020, the 2020 presidential election, in the state of Mississippi, Donald Trump won 93% of evangelical Protestants. In political science terms, that's unanimous. Yeah.
I wanted to thank you so much for bringing such historical depth to this discussion, and also raise one point that I think possibly doesn't have historical precedent in this election, and that's the trials that Trump is facing, which we didn't talk about today. And where do you think they might play in people's decisions in November, if anywhere?
Great question. The trials of Donald Trump. What has happened with the trials of Donald Trump is that the more legal trouble he immerses himself in, the better it is in his numbers. Because if, as I said, many of his voters themselves feel persecuted. Many of his voters feel that they're ignored. Many of his voters feel that they're being treated unfairly. Well, look, you have a presidential candidate with the same issues. He's also being persecuted. And these indictments pile up on each other. So his legal problems, one of which would sink or should sink any other presidential candidate, actually makes him stronger. Just to give you one brief example, back in October of 2023, this past October, a poll was taken, and Trump's legal problems were not as deep as they are today. And people said, yeah, we're concerned about that, but we're still going to vote for him. But the percentages have increased every cycle of these polls, the more that he has been indicted and the more his legal troubles expand. So the only thing, one of the great concerns I have is that the Republican Party has become a funding mechanism for Trump's lawyers. That's basically it, as opposed to helping candidacies. So this is, I think that short of having him in prison, this is going to only increase, and I'll use the word martyrdom, because that's how people feel. And in North Carolina, where you have a large evangelical population, this past week, you heard that word a lot, martyrdom.
Okay, there's another question. Thank you for your presentation. Before I ask my two questions, a remark. The food is very tasty, and I was just wondering about yourself if you want to make a break.
Thank you. Once I'm finished with the questions, I will.
Okay,
I will do so. But thank you.
I came a little bit late, so perhaps my questions have already been answered by your presentation. The first question is the role of the ex-Vice President Mike Pence and his standing against Trump and with the evangelic pool of voters. Yes. The second question is: both candidates are of good age. Anything can happen. We have a lot of months to go before November. Who would be the possible replacements in case of Biden and of Trump, should, out of any circumstances, happen something to them, not being fit to run to the end?
Okay, let me take Mike Pence as an example. Mike Pence is really irrelevant, and almost all Trump voters look upon him as a traitor. You're familiar with Judas. Yeah, that's how they look upon Mike Pence. So, and your second question? Okay, what was that? A replacement, yeah. It depends on when that happens. It depends on when that happens. Because all of the ballots are printed well before the presidential election. So if something happens to Biden or Trump, say in mid-October, it would be too soon to have a new candidate. If it happens tomorrow, the political parties, in which case the vice president could run, but usually in most states, almost all the states, there is a single ballot. In other words, when you vote for president, you vote for vice president at the same time. So if it happens tomorrow, the parties have enough time to select another candidate. Now, that selection cannot be through primaries, through where the people nominate, but through party leaders, which is understandable because you don't have the time. So it really depends when it happens.
Thank you for all.
There is a precedent, and that was in 1872 when there was a minor political party called the Liberal Party, and Horace Greeley, a New York newspaper publisher, ran and passed away before. But he was, as I said, a minor political candidate, and people voted for him anyway because they figured that a dead person was better than the guy who got elected.
Thank you so much for giving us so much insight. You said it's all about economy. But interesting enough, we were not talking about economy at all, but about race and religion. So I wonder, is it really about economy, or is there an economic thing behind the questions of race and religion? Or is it about prejudice, or feeling minor to others, or feeling like a kind of a white worker that has not the power and strength like before? This would be interesting to know.
Yeah, what you have is that race, for example, will determine how you vote to some degree, whether you're white or whether you're black, and a lot of the impetus behind that vote is where you stand in the economy. So they interact with each other, but it's really where you are in the economy. If you look at the polls, you will see the most educated white people vote for Biden. The least educated white people vote for Trump. If you look at black voters, the most educated black voters vote for Biden. Most of the uneducated voters who are black still vote for Biden, but more will vote for Trump. Not more than for Biden, but still, and that's important because in 2020, Biden got 91% of the black vote. In 2024, that doesn't look possible. And of course, black voters are concentrated precisely in those battleground states: Atlanta, Georgia, Detroit, Michigan, Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Yeah.
I just read an article today that indicated that 50% of all voters between 18 and 35 are leaning towards voting for an independent or third-party candidate. How do you see that play out?
Yeah, that's a great question about young voters. I'm with young voters every day at my university. And I remember very well back in 2008 when Barack Obama ran for the first time. Everybody was really out there and excited, and wore the buttons, and you knew something good was going to happen. Little less so in 2012. Very little in 2016. I remember asking my class, well, on Election Day, how many of you are going out there and vote? And they said, well, it depends on the weather. Depends if I can get a ride. Oh, that's usually a time when there are exams I've got to study. And really, we're not interested in Hillary Clinton at all. It increased, and in fact, in 2020, the 18 to 29 age group, not 18-35, but 18 to 29 age group in 2020 voted almost as high as 40%, which is incredible because usually they're in the upper 20s, 27, 28%, because they thought that this was that they better get out there and vote for somebody like Biden, who supports their education through loans and other things. So people may say that now, but I think as the election gets closer, you're going to see, and a lot depends on how Biden runs his campaign, but you're going to see that people are going to say, yeah, I really don't like either of them, but I like this guy much worse than the other guy. I know it's sad. I agree. I would love to go into the voting booth and vote for someone I really want to be president, not to go in there and vote against.
Okay,
somebody.
2 more questions before we give you some rest.
Hi, David. Many thanks for your views and thoughts on the upcoming election. Now, since you've talked about religion having a say in the elections, I'm just wondering, how do the Hindus, Sikhs, Jains, the Indians vote in America?
Yeah, that's a good question. Just let me give you one specific example of that. First of all, they tend to be Democrats. And the Indian and Sikh population in the suburban areas of Atlanta, for example, they played a key role in electing 2 Democratic senators from Georgia, and also turning the state to Joe Biden in the 2020 presidential election. And one of the reasons for that is that they have a very high percentage of participation. I mean, that's one thing that's really key here. I mean, I could give you statistics all day long, but if you don't vote, then that's meaningless. So generally speaking, they tend to vote Democratic in significant numbers, over 60%.
Okay, I guess we have the final question. You said Americans, even closer? Okay, I have a loud voice. I vote in the state of Missouri, so I don't matter.
Yeah, well, Missouri is Truman's place.
Yes, well, it's no longer the day of Truman there.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm also a woman, and you say Americans have a very short memory. The one thing I think women will not have a short memory about is the issue of abortion.
Yeah.
And the second thing that hasn't come up, which also, I went to Catholic school. I remember campaigning for JFK in my little school uniform. The issue of Catholicism was a big one then. Biden is Catholic. The word hasn't fallen here. Coming from a fundamentalist Baptist state, I also see that as a factor, as a problem for Biden. The other thing that speaks for him as far as women are concerned, I think, non-evangelical women, I must say, is the fact that he has supported pro-choice despite contradictions with his own religious beliefs. And I wonder whether the 2 things, the woman issue and Catholicism, play any role at all anymore. You say we have a short memory. I won't forget. Let's put it that way.
Well, you're absolutely right. The political pundits said in 2022, well, yeah, the Democrats own the abortion issue and help them in the midterm elections. But people who have short memories, as I said, they're going to forget about it in 2024. Well, guess what? They haven't forgotten it in 2024. In terms of being Catholic, let me give you an example. 1960, John F. Kennedy, Roman Catholic, the second Roman Catholic in American history. The first was Al Smith in 1928. John Kennedy went to the Southern Baptist Convention in Houston, Texas, to prove to them that he's going to govern for the people of the United States, not for the Pope in Rome. Can you imagine that? I mean, it just boggles the mind. They didn't vote for him anyway. But 2004, John Kerry was the Democratic presidential nominee, Roman Catholic. Look at the newspapers. Look at the polls. Oh, okay. So what? So we've changed for the better. The fact that a person is of a particular religion really matters much less today than it did in 1960. Now, you're absolutely right, though. There are people, I know in North Carolina, there are people who will never vote for a Roman Catholic candidate, but they probably would vote for Republican anyway. So that really doesn't matter. But it's not really going to be an issue that will make or break Joe Biden. In fact, it helps him, particularly in working class areas in Michigan and Ohio and Pennsylvania.
Okay, thank you, David. I'm sure there are lots of questions out there. We give him now a short while to recover from this immense avalanche of questions. So,
well, thank you all very much. I appreciate it.